Okay, good morning. I'm Scott Fox. I'm the CEO of the Orange County Startup Council, which is a community service group focused on accelerating the startup ecosystem in Orange County, and I'm your host this morning. We've got a great panel here. We're going to talk about economic opportunities, investment opportunities, startup support opportunities in non-Tier 1 cities. So I'm using phraseology that I picked up in India last month. I was in Bangalore and Delhi speaking at some conferences, and they have this terminology in India, which I haven't heard much in the States, and it's kind of, well, classist, I guess, but they call cities Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, because frankly, Delhi is Tier 1. It's over 30 million people, and then they class their other cities as government initiatives, Tier 2, Tier 3. And here in the States, we tend to think about venture activity primarily in the Bay Area, of course, and then followed by maybe New York, Boston, LA, and then San Diego, and the next tier, the next tier, the next tier, right? And I spent most of my career in New York and Los Angeles, and the Bay Area, of course. And when I moved to Orange County, I had trouble finding other investors, startups, and I put together the Orange County Startup Council. And with me on the panel today, we have other folks who are going to introduce themselves in a minute, representing other jurisdictions. And we're going to talk about how we stimulate, attract, and increase venture activity in places that don't have Stanford in the middle and billions of capital and huge mafias from companies like Facebook and Google funding everything, and PayPal. And our goal today is to spread out the information. The famous cyberpunk author William Gibson famously said that the future's here, it's just not evenly distributed. And I think that's true about opportunity as well. So what we want to talk about is how to stimulate opportunity in these places that maybe don't have all the blessings that Palo Alto has attracted to its neighborhood. So I want to think about a couple different ways of doing this, and these are, we have, of course, the collection of entrepreneurs, we have collections of investors, and then you have the service providers and the community organizations to feed those. So those are all parts of the ecosystem, and we want to talk about those, how to stimulate them, how to support each other, because I really, personally, I'm working on a book about this actually, that how do these feed each other? And I think that's the challenge that we all face. Hopefully these folks will nod when I say something. Does that sound familiar? To feed these folks, to feed these organizations, have them feed each other so that we create the economic opportunity for everybody. And I don't mean just the white guys, middle-aged white guys in blazers who went to Stanford like me. I'm talking about everybody, and that's why I write books, is to try to help democratize the opportunities that a lot of us who were early at in the internet revolution benefited from. Want to spread those to other places and other types of people, and I know all these folks think the same way. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and hopefully we'll get to some of your questions as well. So if you're in the right room, that sounds great. All right, so let's just have a quick little introduction from each of you guys. Maybe you can say where you're from and why you're on the panel and whether you agree or disagree with what I'm saying. The quick version, because then we'll get to the meatier stuff. So why don't you start? Jason's from Austin, Texas.
Hi, so I'm Jason Scharf. I've been in Austin for 4 years. Some of the people in this room and on this panel are still mad because I actually spent 15 years in San Diego and then left for Austin. And so I am an investor in bio and health companies. I have a podcast called Austin Next, and I write a newsletter and write a lot and argue with people on X and do a lot of different things. And actually, we do have billions in capital and a bunch of the PayPal mafia and a lot of people in Austin. So it is an interesting thing. But what's interesting about it is that Austin is a 30-year overnight success. So it's a lot of things that have happened previously that have been done, and now that we are in that position to be taking off like a rocket ship, what's happening now? How is that changing? And there's a lot of interesting dynamics that are going on.
I'm Korolis, last name Karalavicius, which you'll guess is not typical. So I was born in Lithuania, so I represent actually InnoHub Lithuania, which is a newer initiative from the government of Lithuania. It's based in Palo Alto, near Stanford, at Nordic Innovation House. And our mission is to help Lithuanian founders and companies kind of map their steps into the U.S. market, more so focused on the West Coast, but really trying to do as much as we can. And yeah, myself, I went to university in Illinois, moved to the U.S. as a teenager, went to university in Illinois, then moved to the West Coast, and have stayed on the West Coast for the last 15 years.
Hi, I'm Ashley Keating. I was born and bred in Cincinnati, or in Northeast Ohio, but I've been basically spent most of my life in Ohio. I'm currently flying in from Cincinnati. But I did spend 7 or 8 years in New York and London when kind of the first stint in my career, I was with PricewaterhouseCoopers doing transaction services work. So a lot of my career background's in finance and M&A. When I moved back to Cincinnati, when I was ready to raise kids near family, I took a job with a seed stage venture firm called Cincy Tech, and I was with them for 9 years, first as a CFO, and then the last 3 years as an investment partner. Recently transitioning out from that and sort of hung my own shingle for the moment in consulting emerging fund managers. But my tie to the ecosystem, because Cincy Tech has a mandate to invest across Ohio, most of the work I was doing as an investor and for the 9 years with Cincy Tech was around building the ecosystem, the innovation and venture ecosystem in Ohio and the Midwest. So happy to be here.
Hey everyone, Neil Bloom. I run a early stage fund called Untitled Capital. I'm originally from Los Angeles, worked in the aerospace world, have some friends from the space world here who are speaking on the panel coming up soon right after this. I started a software company and moved it from LA to San Diego more than 10 years ago, and immediately fell in love with the local ecosystem just for how giving it was as soon as I showed up. And pretty quickly was building not only my own startup, but also building ecosystem. And so for at least 10 years now, I've been very focused on how do we build an ecosystem that enables startups to be more successful. When we had an exit of our software company, I started my angel journey, which turned into a syndicate, which is now a fund. And so we focus on super early stage investments, pre-seed and seed. And we're a group of exited founders investing in founders. And so we try to only invest where someone has been there, done that before in a specific industry. So as it grows, we can kind of go broader and broader of where we can invest. And something that's been a phenomenon that's been happening recently is a lot more of our members are having exits and then are starting the next company. And so now we're investing in each other, which is kind of a new, interesting, just single or 2 year old phenomenon that we're starting to study and seeing what does that do for a local ecosystem.
And also, if you're having a good time here, you have to give Neil extra credit. He organized 10 of the panels at this conference. This is the only one he's on, so thank you, Neil. He's done a great job here in San Diego. There's a lot more going on in San Diego with him than there would be without him, so very nice work. Okay, so a couple things. So first, I need to take a selfie because I always do this. And I want everybody, if you don't mind, look like you're having fun, and we'll post this on LinkedIn. And maybe you can wave or something so it looks you all look asleep. There we go. Okay, cool. And Akbar or Olivia, if you could take a few photos from the back of us and send them to me, we'll put them on LinkedIn, make you all famous. All right. So next I want to talk about what you guys want to talk about. So I see 2 roads here that we can take together, and that's a fascinating screen. We don't have pictures of us? Okay, that's all right. Well, just if you get confused, you can ask. We'll tell you our names again later. So there's 2 ways we can go about this. One is I think we could talk about how these ecosystems build themselves, like how do you pull yourselves up by the bootstraps? And the other is how do you try to become more like, say, the Bay Area by attracting outside investment, outside capital, recruiting companies and entrepreneurs to come to your town or your region. Which of those, why don't you guys raise your hands, because we can talk about both. We will talk about both, but first, would you rather raise your hand if you'd rather talk about building your own ecosystem internally? Okay, and then raise your hand if you'd more talk about attracting outside capital and outside investors. Okay, that was a pretty 50-50. So, all right, well, let's just start in the order I said them then. So let's talk first about how you build your ecosystem from your own guts and grit and get that flywheel going like you were talking about, Neil, right? So who has an example perhaps of how something you've done cleverly in your ecosystem that you've seen working? Because I figure what you guys are looking for is examples of how you can do this in your own towns. Is that kind of what you're hoping for? Yeah, okay.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in, being the farthest away from San Diego. So in Lithuania, there's a really high percent of college graduates, kind of dating back to when Lithuania was occupied by the Russian, and there were lots of skilled, talented STEM grads that even went to Russia and kind of got their footing there in some of the space work that they were doing, and then brought a lot of that back to Lithuania. So I think currently in Lithuania, close to 30% of all college grads are graduating with STEM degrees, which is pretty high up there, like I think like relative to kind of South Korea level. In the US, for example, it's about 23%. So like given that foundation, it kind of makes sense that we have this competitive advantage of like highly talented population. And then on top of that, Lithuania regained independence in 91, so it's kind of like rebirth of this country. And over the last 30 years, it's like gone leaps and bounds. Like every time I go visit it, it just looks like a new country. And there's more and more opportunities. There's, I think, about 1,000 startups per like the latest stats. 270 of them are in fintech, which is like one kind of core area that attracts a lot of also foreign founders going to Lithuania and starting their businesses there due to like friendly regulations and the ecosystem there. But yeah, going back to kind of educated audience and then carving out those niches. So in Lithuania, the three areas that have deep competence are lasers, photonics, and then fintech, and then cybersecurity as kind of like the more recent evolution of the talent from those other areas kind of spreading out. And I would say what's really cool is that at this point, it's a country of 3 million people, but there's 2 unicorns, and they haven't had an exit yet. But I think as we get closer to that, there's going to be lots of folks that were involved early on that then go on and kind of replicate and invest in future companies and so on. So it's really exciting time to see like that kind of ramping up, and it still feels like really early on.
That's great. So the first couple of those are kind of accidents of history that would be tough for other jurisdictions to replicate, right? But the second part is stuff like we talk about in Orange County all the time, and maybe some of you others do as well. What clusters are we going to pick? What industries, what sectors are we good at that we can double down on?
You're not going to pick them, and saying the point about accidents of history, it's not an accident of history. There are first principles to ecosystems. The first thing that you will do, and if you call yourself Silicon XYZ, you will fail. How many people here have heard the Oscar Wilde quote, "Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery"? How many people here realize that that's half the quote? Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery that mediocrity pays to greatness. It's an insult. It's not a positive quote. If you call yourself Silicon Beach, Silicon Hills, which is what Austin uses, Silicon Slope, Silicon Alley, you will never be your own thing. You will be a pale comparison. I have a strong belief that there are first principles to ecosystems, and it's when you lean into those first principles that you actually are something unique. I had on to my podcast Craig Cummings, who's from Moonshot Capital. And we were having this conversation about these New Yorkers came to Austin, and they were being very, very transactional, and it was not this fit for Austin, and it doesn't work, and it's bad. I'm like, hold on a second. You saying they're being very transactional? I mean, very, very deal making. What I get, you get, we'll make this trade. So you're telling me that the deal making culture, where Wall Street is, you can draw a straight line from Dutch fur trading in the 1600s, which is what New York started as, to Wall Street. Wall Street couldn't have been created anywhere else but New York City. Understanding that about the history of where you are, what the special sauce of that ecosystem is what is going to be. So it's not necessarily an accident of history. Understanding that nature of that ecosystem is what it's going to be. Going and saying I don't know why Chattanooga is always the one I pick on. Going to Chattanooga and saying, hey, why don't we have social media here? Why? Why would you? But understanding we have this resource, that resource, the 30-year history. The one point is the reason Silicon Hills was the name of Austin was because we actually had semiconductors. It was actually silicon. So there is a history of semiconductors there. So it's one of the few places you could name that. I'm still trying in my utter to kill that name in Austin. But the point is, don't look to Silicon Valley and say, this is the latest thing. Well, we got to be in AI because that's the hot thing. Do you have any background in AI? Is that something that you can actually do? understand the resources, understand the first principles of your ecosystem, and lean into that.
I think that's great advice because we all have something going on. Our towns wouldn't exist except that there was something, right? There were rivers there maybe 200 years ago or something like that. Did that lead to something that's obvious in the days of tech? I don't know, but I think it's a great point. Thank you. Ashley, what do you think?
Yes, no, I think along with that, the assets like in Ohio, in particular Cincy, recognizing like some of the flagship large corporations that are there that feed talent and thought leadership, and for us, for example, healthcare was big because we have the top pediatric children's hospital, Cincinnati Children's. You have the Cleveland Clinic up in Cleveland. You have a couple of CROs, with clinical research organizations that help with therapeutic drug trials. And then several medical device companies that were successful. So looking to those assets in your community as well, which can potentially develop as a route to history, but that's just like a present day easy win, a way to orient as to where you might be successful. And then the other comment I was going to make, which is probably unique to Ohio, I suspect, although it sounds like Lithuania's maybe got public dollars involved. Ohio created a program where they provided a one-to-one grant match to create organizations in the state that were focused on seed stage investment and they call it pre-investment services to entrepreneurs. And I think the reason they did that is the Midwest is a very risk-averse culture. Like in California, I think because of Silicon Valley, I feel like the mentality is a bit more risk forward. You have people who go out and say, I'm an investor, and you're seed stage investing. There's just not as many people oriented to this asset class, if you will. In the Midwest, they're very much, old school manufacturing businesses built from the ground up. I bootstrapped this myself. The venture capital orientation was just not there. And the state stepped in and catalyzed this but not for this, we're not going to get anybody else off the bench to invest in this asset class. And they figured out a way to incentivize investors also into funds by creating upside on above 1x returns. And so it has now propagated through probably, I think, 15 years in the making, and I feel like there are some founders who have had successes that are now able to go do round 2 or go do round 3 or now are investors themselves. The challenge with this, though, is once you give a public dollar, how do you take it away? So that's, I think, the challenge that I'm seeing now. But to get it going, there are many states who are looking to Ohio and how their model was created, and it has created energy where I think in the tech world, in the venture world, would not have existed.
But then the reindustrialization and the hard tech and the first principles of Ohio, you guys are primed for what's going on right now.
Correct.
Right. That's a great point. I'm from Detroit originally, and I spent a lot of time back in Detroit trying to reinvigorate that city because it's fallen on hard times, as you may have heard. And they figured out finally that they are not going to be a software capital or a social media company center. They're going to do, guess what? Automotive, right? They're really doubling, tripling down on mobility. So there's electric car stuff going on between the University of Michigan and Ann Arbor and downtown Detroit. They have the first mile of paved highway in the world was Woodward Avenue in Detroit back when Henry Ford was active. They've got the first, I think it was the first anyway, the inductive charging street, right, where you drive your Tesla down and the street actually charges your car, that kind of thing. So they've figured out their focus finally, and now they're moving on, and they're trying to catch up with Ohio because Ohio's done a great job of this public-private partnership sort of thing. But your point, it's worth a whole other panel, is this is for you guys, as advice, when your public entities get involved with investment, what do you do with any profits? It's very strange for government entities to suddenly be making money. They're not used to that. And especially if there's charitable organizations involved, it becomes unrelated business income, which can threaten a charity's status with the IRS. So there's a lot of machinations in terms of governance and regulation when companies, when for-profit venture type activity gets under the umbrella of government or charitable organizations, which is a whole big topic, which sounds familiar, right? Okay, so let's hear about San Diego.
Sure. With any ecosystem, I think the value of it is it's kind of like the connectivity of it. And so if most communities that are super advanced, if you think of like a neural network, everyone is more connected. And in a startup community, maybe that's more nascent, like San Diego maybe, or a few of ours, less connected. And therefore, there's like super connectors that everyone kind of goes to then get connected to the next one, which is a really slow process for everyone to get connected.
And by super connectors, you mean people.
People.
Right.
Yeah. And typically it's like one-to-one, right? It's like, all right, meet one person, who's the next person I should meet, as opposed to everyone meeting in parallel because everyone is connected already. And so something that like COVID, I think, killed a lot of is the physical density, the gathering together, not just for a one-day conference or a nighttime networking event, but every day showing up and meeting both purposely and accidentally. And so I think San Diego is actually atrophied by not having that. I think we actually peaked 2017, 2018 in like neural connectedness. Even in OC, I was going up in 2019 to the old Cove because in the same parking lot was Evo Nexus, a Starbucks, and a co-working
The
space.
University of California, Irvine had a center.
And I would drive up there because I knew walking in between meetings, I would run into 2 or 3 other founders, right? Whereas the new Cove, I'm locked down. I can't actually even show up on the second floor.
Right, because now it's a high security building like everything is after COVID.
Right. And so the random bumping into is layered on top of constant density, on top of other, like a platform for building ecosystem is where I believe startup communities, and specifically San Diego, needs to lean into that physical place. Now, of course, I'm sure someone's going to bring up, the distance. Great. Make them in every hub, right? And put them in every city. Or do it micro version. If you're running an event, make that day the hub of the day and bring everyone to do a bunch of stuff that day or that week or other things like that. And so we're starting to learn that, and we're starting to finally have people who are super connectors who are thinking, how do we scale and not just be the person who connects everyone? And so the story's still being written, but this year for me is the year of physical density.
And I agree. So talking about Orange County for a second, because that's most of my focus these days, we have the same conclusions, right? So one of the things I've been working with the city of Irvine and the county of Orange, we're trying to find a building, a place, create a hub, and it's got to be near the freeways. And I keep saying, and I'm saying this in Detroit too, because like I said, I'm very active there. Why don't we have a hub? And I recommend this to all of you guys because we don't have that physical density, especially for startups, right? Because so many of us work. How many of you are founders? Yeah, okay, right. So so many of us work at home, right? Or it's 2 of you, right? So even if there's 2 or 3 or 4 of you, you're probably in half a dozen different places, and you don't even see each other, much less other folks, right? So before COVID, like we had a really active WeWorks in Irvine, where there would be hundreds of people, but it'd be say 200 people, but it was dozens of companies, right? Because they're all little companies, and they had a community there. But after COVID, that all kind of flopped, and now we're all comfortable working from home. So I totally agree. So back to Irvine, we've been trying to get a building. So we're trying to get the city to give us a building near the railroad station. Why near the railroad station? Because that's near the freeways. It's a transport hub, right? So everybody can get there and has lots of parking. And I keep saying, why don't we have a building that's open, not 8 to 4 like a city building, but more like 4 to 8, right? Or noon to 10 would be even better because startup people, we're doing business after 5 o'clock. Sorry, right? And we're coding things, right? So how about we have a building that's open at least 5 days a week? How about 7 would be even better? And if you could give us a building for $100,000, we could staff this with one person who's just at the desk. So you keep out, the transient people who are not there to do business, and it's just a co-working hub. And then have somebody from the community pick 20 different organizations and have an event every night. Right? Every night at 7 o'clock, there's going to be something happening at the hub. Whatever you call it, give it a cool name that's reflective of your local culture, right? And let's have an event every night. And one night it's cybersecurity, and the next night it's HR, and then it's a legal thing, whatever. I don't care. But so people know. And then ideally there's a restaurant and a bar in the same strip mall, right?
And coffee.
And coffee. All right, coffee in the morning, right? And a
caffeine.
bar afterward, right? I'm a night person, you can tell, right? So you guys have a coffee. I'll do the nighttime. But that kind of thing is what we don't have anymore, at least in my towns. And it sounds like Neil's nodding. And
I want to ask, actually, there's an example of Capital Factory in Austin.
Yeah,
is
that's
this
right.
It? Is this an example that's working?
So, no, because there's an evolution perspective. So
And explain what Capital Factory is. if you
So
don't mind.
Capital Factory is a co-working space that also they have a VC-ish arm. It's slightly complicated. It did, and the reason I say no is this, and it was the point I was making this, is it depends on the evolution of a city, of an ecosystem. So there is a point when you go, I think there's essentially 3 tiers of ecosystems. So when you go from like 0 to 1, so you've got nothing and you're going ecosystem, you absolutely need if you build it, they will come. You've got everyone scattered, you need a singular location building, everybody needs to get together. You then get to a point where you're now going in this kind of this thriving moment, it's growing. As you get to that next stage, the idea of a singular place doesn't make sense anymore, and you have to get to the Cambrian explosion moment, which is you need the bio neighborhood, you need the cybersecurity, you actually need to break apart the singular. So, as an example, it was using a Capital Factory. It has been actually quite good as they put on these kind of like defense tech things. So they've been good at kind of bringing all together as the hub for defense tech, like Army Futures Command is stationed there. But otherwise, no, it actually hasn't. And in some cases, it's almost they're being the front door, but things don't flow out. And that becomes one of the problems when you have, because 8-9 years ago when it found it was, but it becomes a stopper. And like, so Houston has the same thing. They've got the Ion, and I'm like, you kind of need to get out, right? And so there was a great fireside chat that.
Why not Capital Factory for defense and a different one for software and a different one for AI?
Well, that's the point. Are
they different ecosystems in a sense?
That's the point. I was actually going to say that is that there was a fireside chat with Jim Breyer, who Breyer Capital. He was one of the first institutional in Facebook, so kind of after Peter Thiel, and he's been in lots of different stuff. And he was doing a fireside with Jay Herzl, the president of UT. This was about 2 years ago, and the way he said it was, centers of excellence, they have to be together, but then the centers of excellence don't have to be together. So, like the AI neighborhood, the quantum neighborhood, like AI has to be together, bio should be together, but then those themselves don't have to be together. And then what you want is figuring out how to get that connective tissue across. So that becomes a lot harder and a lot more organic. So as you get bigger, and I actually think San Diego is in that, places like San Diego are at that point, it's a lot harder to steer. And a lot of people want to, especially in places with like city government, want to be like, well, we should do this, we should do that. And it becomes much more of like, no, just get out of the way, make it easier, instead of saying we're gonna this policy group, this economic development group. So one of the things when you're trying to think about your ecosystem.
So you're saying committees are not the answer?
Is
Especially government committees?
Understanding where your ecosystem is in the life cycle. If it really is, we're going from 0 to 1, then it should be like, yes, we need that singular place. If you're later on, it should be like, if you're going to build the building, it's actually going to be more of a bottleneck.
It's funny that's a real thing. So Cincinnati had a place called Union Hall, and it's historic over the Rhine neighborhood. It's cool, kind of brownstone, couple floors. Our office used to be there, and you would like slide on your rolling chair because the floor was slightly slanted. It was just endearing. But then UC built its innovation hub called the 1819 Innovation Hub, and it was in a different part of the. Who's got the hype music going? Thank you.
Really great report.
And this is UC Cincinnati, not California.
Yeah, sorry, University of Cincinnati, in their uptown, like a mile off their campus, so probably a mile drive away. You would not believe the political, banter and fighting that created, because it was like, oh, now now what are we going to do? Are you going to take the energy away from Union Hall? And it's like, no, to your point, actually, as time has gone on, there's a place for both buildings.
So you were
Right?
ready for that. You'd moved to the next level.
Well, I don't know if people were like, it seemed like it was, people were worried because now it wasn't all going to be in one place anymore. But so it was just interesting that like politics, people were
How
getting
far into that experiment are you then?
a couple of years.
And how does it look?
I think there's room for both.
There
I
is.
mean, because the university was trying to create a facility where venture plus, companies like P&G and Kroger and Fifth Third interacted with their innovation team and their students. Union Hall, has space where founders who, founders trying to stand something up can go co-work or go work on the first floor. Like there's a use case for both, and it creates more venues and more meeting places. And now, like Microsoft put a small kind of AI innovation center within UC's building. It's the first of its kind, and so I think it just goes to your point. I remember the friction that caused by having two buildings.
If you look at it historically, whether like Florence or the Paris in the 1920s, or even like the heyday of Silicon Valley, the places were never built. They happened organically. It was like this coffee shop, that spot. It was never, we built the magic place and people came. It was like, no, this became the spot, and then reputation happened, and then the flywheel started.
The other thing I would add, because I've observed this with Southern California, being 2-hour drive-ish between LA and San Diego.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're being really nice
I get
there.
you. I get you.
2 to 6 hours.
Well, I'm going with like the 9 to 10 p.m. slot, right? So Ohio has 3 cities, the 3 C's: Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati. The 2 on the outers, right? Cleveland and Cincy are about 4.5 hour drive apart. Columbus being 2 hours from Cincy, so in the middle. And it's all like they were fighting and stepping on each other, when really the power was recognizing if we went kind of to market, if you will, globally as a unit, that we would do better. And I think that leaf has finally turned, as opposed to trying to steal from each other all the time. So that's just another consideration. Like when you're really trying to play at a national and global scale, those cities aren't that far apart. And so stop getting in each other's way and act as a unit.
I would add a bit about from Lithuania's perspective, where you're describing like the step 1 and then step 2 is like multiple hubs. Like I've actually seen that exactly play out. So there's like a biotech town that's like being built. And I think what the Lithuanian government is doing right is it's like empowering like real estate and the specific industry sector entrepreneurs to kind of do it on their own, as opposed to like, we're going to build it for you kind of thing. So I think that to some of the kind of questions of like public-private partnership, I think as much as the government can just like unlock the doors and open up the rules and let those entrepreneurs create, whether it's like the industry or like just real estate entrepreneurs that are serving these industries, the more sustainable it is and the less like 9 to 4 it feels like.
Yeah. I think that's right. That's our experience with government as well. Government officials, the good ones, the bad ones don't believe in growth, and they think that this is the wrong thing to be doing, which doesn't mean they're crazy. It's just that they're more focused on traditional constituents. Right? These people have to be elected, right? So they're focused on the traditional businesses, protecting the property values of existing areas. I see some nodding heads. But those that do want to help, they don't have a lot of tools, right? They can adjust regulation. Of course, they can lower taxes, but they're never going to do that. So they don't have a lot of tools to work with, and we have found basically that real estate is one of the places that they may be able to do something, because the city controls a lot of venue space, for example. We run Irvine Tech Week every year, which is a big, just what it sounds like, Irvine Tech Week. And we have several thousand people show up, but we couldn't do that without the city giving us big buildings and theaters, and we literally use City Hall, right? Like I'm on stage at City Hall in the council chambers with several hundred people, and without those venues, we couldn't do it. So that's something. It's good to, for those of you who are nodding, thinking about what government can do, because what you really want they can't do. They can't make things free, in terms of taxes. They can work on permitting, making it easier. But I've met with many city and state and even Congress people asking, what can we do? And it's cutting regulations is hard, but that's one. And taxes is tough. And then so venues and real estate permitting to allow for events has been one that we've found anyway.
I think like Brad Fell's Startup Communities
Yeah,
book.
that's going to be one of my recommendations. Yeah,
I think he just puts it best. Is thinking about it's the builders, and then the support, and the just key in the end is any of these things has to be builder led. And then the support, whether that be from...
And by builders, he means founders, entrepreneurs, not construction builders.
Yeah.
Like we're talking about entrepreneurs. Both, perhaps. But.
You do need the real builder.
When I think of builders, I think of founders, funders, and innovators, right? Whether it be that's kind of the group in and of itself. And then the support being government, services providers, all of those kinds of things. Because just at the core, then, those are the people who know what they need, and you have incentive alignment. I mean, just the perfect example I always give is... I think there's always a fundamental problem with the example of a city-led incubator or a city-led accelerator, and it's not for bad intentions, but the perfect example is, okay, what is the measurement that they care about at the city? Is we want jobs, okay? For a startup that goes in, they want value creation. Those two things might be aligned, or they might not be.
That's right.
And so that just is going to create some issues.
Absolutely. All right, we're running out of time a little bit, so let's move on a little bit. And all these folks, I presume you'll be around for questions afterwards. We're going to do some questions also, so think about your questions. I want to leave some time for that. We got about 10 minutes left. So let's talk a little bit about attracting capital and workers and companies to your area, because that's another big thing that governments like to do, and everybody likes to do, right? You'd love to have a new employer show up in town and hire all your college graduates or whatever. But it's a challenge in its own way, right? So what have you seen working, or are you against that? Are you trying to do entirely homegrown stuff?
I could talk about Lithuania and Vilnius and why it became this magnet for fintech companies. There's 270 fintech startups out of an ecosystem of 1,000 companies. So a quarter is fintech, and founders come from all over Europe. And
two unicorns, 3 unicorns?
And 2 unicorns,
Two unicorns so far.
Couple others in the works, but yeah.
A country of 3 million people, you caught that, right? This is working.
Yeah. But what happened is you had the government proactively decide that we're going to remove all these regulations for fintech, for founding these companies, because they need banking licenses, and so we need to get out of the way but create infrastructure, unlike what happened in the US with the crypto, right? There's just no clarity. It's what are we doing? Nobody knows. So they created the clarity, and they made it easy to start the companies, and then the founders just like magnet. They and so there's 270 companies. So that's kind of a success, I think, and an example of government making the decisions and getting out of the way.
And also leaning into something that was a natural strength in the community.
And there was talent for that, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I guess to sort of longer stories, the talent also comes from initially in the early stages of independent Lithuania, there were lots of banks from Europe that were creating back office functions in Lithuania, right? So these were support roles, et cetera. But then from that, it kind of seeded it, and it grew and it grew. And then the more technical talent joined. And then these folks said, screw it, I can make double the amount of money, or we can create something big here. Let's start a company, and that's working.
From a capital perspective, and I think specifically in San Diego, it's not even fair to call San Diego a startup or a hub, because there's a bunch. The life sciences world, I think, is much further advanced, but I think our software and even hardware is actually very nascent and is level 1, I believe. And so what we can learn from on the software hardware world is what's working in the life sciences, which is the recycle of capital, and looking at what is recycled into locally. And so while San Diego is a top 5 VC inflow city, I think we were $6.6 billion of VC dollars invested in San Diego. I think it's 99.9% came from outside of San Diego. And so it's great during the building phase of these companies, when those exits come, 80 to 90% of that capital will flow back out of the city to the funds. Then 80% of that capital will flow out to the LPs, wherever they're living. And so I think you need both. You need to build companies now, but you also need to simultaneously look for opportunities to localize capital, so that you can recycle that. And so something we've seen in life science is, a $10 billion exit from a Prometheus Bio or something. And with less than a year, those founders went and started a new company and came right out the gate with $400 million of capital from their same investors and right back to work with the same team. And it's working. And unfortunately, like in the software and tech world, and it's not just San Diego, there's no exits happening whatsoever. And so investors have been locked up for 10, maybe 15 years in these companies, and so they eventually stop deploying because they can't put any more out until they get refilled. And so I'm hopeful for this year to finally have some new liquidity for our long-term investors who will then start refilling or for our exits, for our founders to go start new companies, then go get local funding, hopefully, if the original founders or investors are refilled. But I think the localized capital piece is something always worth working on. It just takes a long time to find it.
And all the work I've done, Neil and I have both been at this a long time. I don't know these other folks as well, but it sounds like they have too. The thing that's missing in most ecosystems is this flywheel effect. And it sounds like you guys are just getting there. So the money can come in, but if it doesn't stay there, grow there, and then reinvest there, and it leaves, like in Orange County, we've had several acquisitions like Palmer Luckey's first company got bought by Facebook, right? And it went to Menlo Park, and the money, Palmer came back, but the money and the people all stayed there, right? So that's a win, but it didn't really benefit our local economy, right? So the ideal is just what Neil's done, and he's doing it personally, right, with his own money, right? Take local money, reinvest it, and then hopefully that you can create that PayPal mafia in your town. And if you're looking for a way to stimulate your local economy in this startup sense, I think that's what you want to do. Find the people who've made money and who have stayed, and encourage them to pool some money and start a syndicate or an angel group or something like that. And I work with angel groups, like I'm part of Tech Coast Angels. I do this all over the world. I help a local angel group increase capital access locally. And it may not just be in tech, frankly, right? But if you can have the money raised locally and stay local, I think that'll spin you.
I'm going to put a quick asterisk on local capital. I think once a local community has had some exits, I think wherever you made your money, you should invest back in the areas that you have made your money in. And so I think to talk about a tech exit, when a software company is acquired, that software founder, if they suddenly have new wealth, should invest back where they have built before, because honestly, for the earliest of stage companies, the capital is not nearly as valuable as the wisdom and the cheat codes that founder could give with the money. So let's say they write
and the
100K.
network they've created.
Right. They could open doors for customers and future hires. And that is a part of like the density building, which I call kind of stay in your lane capital, which is invest only where you actually can provide expertise.
All right, I'm already getting the 5 minute. I can talk about this stuff all day. I hope you guys are interested. It looks like everybody's still awake, but we're going to have to move a little quicker. I want to give some actionable tips. So I asked all of our panelists to think about something specific that they could recommend to you as a takeaway. So this might be a podcast, a conference, a book, whatever it is, something that could be useful for you. So have at it. Who's got something specific to share with our audience?
I think
All right.
we're going to say Brad Feld.
I'll say if it's too warm here in San Diego, you should go to there's an event. It's actually in Latvia. It initially was created as a TechCrunch Europe thing, but then became its own thing, and it's in February in Riga, and it's like the biggest Baltic event. So go to that, and then
What's it called?
What is it called?
What is it?
What is it?
TC. Remind me.
Tech Chill.
Tech Chill, right? How could I forget? So it's like a cold plunge, in for the San Diegans.
Okay.
Yeah, truly. And then in the fall, there is the startup fair in Lithuania. So it's like the biggest event, brings all the investors, all the startups, and the ecosystem, again, is like fairly small. So you kind of get to meet a lot of people, which is really good.
Excellent. That's one I didn't know about. Anybody else heard of that one? That's a good one. All right. Next.
I would add another event in that it's actually grown, this past year's was significantly better than any I've experienced before. And I think it was the flywheel coming to life, which is an event called Startup Cincy Week in Cincinnati, Ohio, Startup Cincy Week. It seemed to, I've been to the Cleveland Columbus versions. I've also been to Raleigh, which is in Indianapolis. They do that quite well. The state puts a lot of money into it. So that's another if you're interested in Midwest. But Startup Cincy Week was pretty phenomenal and it's the right level of like enough people there to make it interesting and good networking, but small enough where you get a chance to really actually network and feel like you got through a good list of people.
Is that a particular time of year usually?
It's usually in October.
October in Cincinnati. Okay, that's another one I didn't know about. Jace?
Well, shameless plug. If you want to know about Austin, you can listen to Austin Next. But if you want a non-biased, I'd recommend Joe Lonsdale's American Optimist. Is a great podcast, and he does talk about the fact that he's in Austin as well. For an upcoming conference, if I have poked them enough, because I think they're going to announce where soon, the Reindustrialize 2.0 conference, when they announce it, I'm hoping they announce it, it's going to be in Austin. It was in Detroit last year, but I think they're going to say it's in Austin, so we'll see if that's coming up.
More for book resources, we kind of alluded to it. Brad Feld not just wrote Startup Communities, and then he wrote a 10-year update to it, which I think is important if you're an ecosystem builder. To reiterate what we're talking about here, the entrepreneur is at the center of the universe and is the customer for everyone else. But he also wrote Venture Deals, and I think more founders could get up to speed pretty quickly within a book of like understanding terms, every aspect of venture. And then another book, Startup Boards, how to be a good board member, the importance of building a good board too. So those are like a really core, easy book. And then for the CEO, for the founders, Dan Martell's book, oh my God, the names just escaped me. It's just like the operational playbook of how to run your day as a CEO. It's got like 2 chapters on like how to hire a VA and how give this book to your VA and run how they should run you. I buy the book for pretty much every portfolio company. It just escaped me. Anyway, those are some books that I share often with people.
Excellent. Let me add another plug for Brad. The Startup Communities book is pretty much the only book that's out there that talks about how startup communities really work. And it's based on, as he just put it, the founder is the customer for everybody. A lot of investors think they're the center of the world, and the governments, of course, think they're the center of the world, and then the university thinks it's the most important. Without the founders, you got nothing, right? So it all has to start with the founders. And there's a lot of faith involved, which the book discusses. And so I'd recommend that as well. What I'd recommend even more is the sequel that I'm writing. So I'm working on 2 books right now, so it's my plug, and they won't be out for a year or 2. But the first one is, the second one is this one, because I've been doing a lot of this work, and Brad's great, but I think there's more to be said, and that'll be coming in probably 2 years. But right now I'm working on a book about how to raise money. I'm a serial founder and now mostly an investor. I've been on both sides of the table for a long time. So in plain English, how to think like an investor so you can raise money. So watch for that one in about 6 months. But then 2 other things. One is, if you're in the Southern California area, how many of you from SoCal? Are you local? Oh, okay, so fine. All right. So if you're interested in business in Orange County, like I said, the Orange County Startup Council is an organization I run. The newsletters are free. Just get on the newsletter list. And if you are a startup, you should come and join. It's only $25 and get your listing. Then send us your news. We're basically making noise for you to help you. And if you're a service provider, come support us. We're supported by sponsors. So this model can work in a lot of your towns, right? A lot of your towns are missing media covering this. And I'd recommend this approach. I'm happy to help others do this. That's why I said I'm literally writing a book about how to do it. And then a takeaway that probably people don't know, especially in the conference line, that I also want to recommend to everybody. Like I've said a couple times, I'm from Detroit. Detroit runs a conference every year that I think is amazing. I go every year. And it's called Detroit Homecoming. And what they do at Detroit Homecoming, Detroit is a famous city it was the Silicon Valley of 100 years ago, literally, right? It was all the money, everything. Detroit was a big deal. And then it fell off a cliff, right? But that means there's lots of people who left, including me. And they have this conference that's run by the local Crain's Detroit Business, which is the business magazine there. And it's free for expats, expatriates. So anybody who has left, who's interested in investing and working in the city, is welcome. So you have to pay your own airfare and hotel, but they put together a great program. They have the university, the mayor, all kinds of amazing entertainment, because Detroit's full of great music and food. And it's a 3-day thing, and it's amazing. And my point is, first, if you're from Detroit, you should go. But more importantly, all of you could do that. I think one of the most underleveraged things is that everybody is from somewhere. And I've never met an ecosystem that didn't think it had brain drain and wanted more people to stick around and reinvest. And events like this that appeal to your alumni, I think, are a feature that everybody could adopt. So I'm happy to talk to anybody more about that, because it's really clever, and it builds an asset class for the city. Okay, so we all talk too much. I'm sorry that it looks like there's not enough time for questions, but we're all around. I think we probably need to move out to the hallway, and we can take questions out there if anybody's interested. Thank you all for staying, and I hope it was interesting. Thanks very much.